Hello everyone and welcome to another random bits and pieces segment from my brain, and today sit a while for we're gonna talk about Recettear for a little bit. Now keep in mind this isn't a full-blown review, this is a little bit more of an opinion piece so that we can see how well Recettear fares several years after its release and see if it's still a relevant game, if it's still a fun game, if it's a game that you should play. We're gonna go ahead and take a look at that. So it's not going to be a video that's going to be overly edited. It's not going to be overly long. It's just me in front of a camera giving my opinion. So I put on a clean shirt, sort of kind of made my bed in the background, and that's pretty much where we're at. So Recettear was a game made by a company named Easy Game Station. The game was made in 2007, but it wasn't localized until 2010. So at the moment of shooting this video, we're in 2020, so the game is 13 years old, although it's been only available for us in the West for 10 years. So we're gonna go ahead and cover a few things here. Again, it's not meant to be an in-depth review. If that's what you're looking for, I'm afraid that's not going to be this. It's kind of my opinion, and I'm gonna kind of also go back on my playthrough that I did, that you can also find on my channel. So obviously when we talk about games, one of the first thing that comes to mind is the gameplay. So how did Recettear fare in terms of gameplay? Does it play well? The gameplay, to be honest, is kind of unique. The setting is kind of unique. It's an item shop game, which in itself, when you just say that, make the game sound kind of boring on its own, but it's not actually. But because there's a little bit more to it than just selling things in a shop. I think that they kind of did that pretty good. So there's a mix of selling things, buying things. There's a lot of different characters whose story kind of progresses as the game advances, and of course there's dungeons where you get to go and do random dungeons where you can get some items that then you can sell. So when you put all of that together, it's kind of a unique game. There's a few other games that might be borrowing from Recettear, or that even come a little close, but there's really not a lot of games like that. So its uniqueness definitely is a plus for it. It fits a niche that really does not exist much in any other games, at least not any other games that I have played or that I have heard about. And the game definitely has its own charm to it. I mean, come on, Recette is a little girl. It's super easy to feel like she's your little sister or something like that. It's really easy to cheer for her. She has like that innocence to her, just like a little girl, I suppose. So it's really easy to get into the game and her as a character because of that. And even if she's a kid, the game doesn't really have a childish outlook on it. There's a few mature themes that are actually brought up during the course of the game, although nothing super major or anything like that. But there's a few hints in there. But really, having Recette as the protagonist really helps the game. If it was just a random dude, I'm not sure that the game would have that same appeal to it. So another thing about the gameplay, and I briefly mentioned it, is that the game has random dungeons to it. So basically, any given day you can go to the Adventurers Guild, hire an adventurer, and go and clear some dungeons so that you can kill monsters and get some loot, and then sell the loot, obviously. Now, back in 2007, of course, random dungeons was not a new thing. There were a few games that were using that. I mean, we can think about like Diablo, for example. So, games like that would have some elements of it, but it was not as prevalent as it is now. In 2020, it does feel like every other game has some roguelike elements or procedurally generated elements or things like that, so it feels like every other game is like that. But back in 2007 it really wasn't the norm, so that really kind of helps with the gameplay as well, because whenever you play you don't quite know what you're gonna get from a dungeon, so it does have its appeal as well. So for the gameplay, that's pretty much it. Again, I'm not going into super crazy details, that's not really the goal of this little video. As far as the graphics go, well, you can see them on the screen. If you've followed my playthrough, you've been seeing the graphics all along. Personally, I feel that the graphics have aged okay. That's kind of one of the pros of using a little bit cartoony-ish looking graphics, I would say. That's definitely one of the draws for that, is that those tend to age, usually at least, quite better than, you know, if a game in 2007 tried to go for super realistic graphics, 13 years later they don't look all that great. So when you have kind of a cartoony feel like that, that's what I mean by aging a little bit better, because cartoony is cartoony, so 13 years later it still looks cartoony, it still looks okay. Don't get me wrong, those graphics were not outstanding by any means back in 2007, but they're serviceable for the type of game that this is. Again, it's all part of the charm of the game. I don't think this game works if they're going for a super crazy realistic look. So again, the graphics work pretty good, and it's kind of a pretty good outlook for the indie look or the indie genre of this game, because that was definitely an indie title. Even though it's ended up selling pretty well, it crushed all expectations. It sold so much more than they were expecting. So I mean, there are some sprites that look pretty good during the cutscenes. It's not really cutscenes, but some of them are looking pretty good, but all in all, when you're in a dungeon and everything, I mean, the graphics are not outstanding, but they are pretty serviceable for the type of game that it is, and that's totally fine. So we're in 2020. Now the rage, well, it has been like that for quite a few years now, but the rage is all about new game plus. How many times can you replay the game while keeping your progress and doing all of that, unlocking all of those cool things and everything. So Recettear does have some of that. It does have a Game Plus, and with a few different modes. One of them being survival, where you can basically play the game forever if you want, where the depth just increases every week until you just cannot pay it. So that's definitely something. So as far as replayability goes, there is definitely something to do after you've beaten the game. The thing is, though, the main story is really short. It's maybe 15 hours. If you followed my playthrough, that's about how much I spent on it. Granted, I do know a little bit what I'm doing and everything, but even then, even not knowing what you're doing, I don't think you're gonna spend much more than 20 hours playing the main story of the game. And the thing is that whenever you start a new game of Recettear, you're always gonna get the same characters to start and everything. So, for example, if Teal is your favorite character, well, you have to unlock her if you start a brand new game. So if you start a brand new game, you are going to get Louis as your first adventurer, and then usually you're going to get Charm after that, and then you start building that up from there and unlocking a few more adventurers as you go. But there's no randomization in that, which probably would have added to the replayability of the game if you weren't getting Louis, as the first adventure every single time. At least that's how I feel. Of course, some of what I'm saying here does not apply if you use a Game Plus. If you've beaten the game, then there's ways where you can start with different characters and everything. I'm really talking about if you start a brand new playthrough. The replayability of the game, to me, it's going to be mostly for completitionists or for people that want the challenge of the survival mode, which I've played and is really fun, by the way. After you've beaten the game, more than likely you're still going to have some storylines that are not finished and everything, so that kind of follows into that. And then I say completionist because of course you can try to collect every item. There's many dungeons. If you follow my playthrough, there's more dungeons than what you've seen. There's the endgame dungeon that is really hard and has all of the best items, obviously, and whatnot. So, and then you can synthesize all of the, or fusion rather, all of those iron items and whatnot. So there is replayability regarding that, but as far as the core game, the main story and everything, not really. It's always the same thing. The random dungeons do add some replayability, but again, you're always gonna get the Amber Garden, as the second dungeon and whatnot. So it always kind of goes into the same progression whenever you start a new game. So while the dungeon floors themselves are randomized, the dungeon setting per se is not. It's always going to be in the same order. And then of course there's the music. You're hearing one of the tune in the background here. I think the music is fine. There's definitely not a whole lot of tracks in the game. I don't think there's more than 10, to be honest. But the music, again, fits the setting really well. It kind of has its own little charm, and actually some of the songs might get stuck in your head a little bit. I know one of them sometimes comes crawling into my brain, and I'm like, oh, so it does happen. But, it's nothing too crazy. It's very mellow for music, and again, it just fits the pace of the game really well. So all in all, in 2020, is this game worth it? Yes. I would give that game an honest 8.5 out of 10. Again, that's my opinion. It's not meant to be, taken for cash or anything like that. It fits a niche, again, that really no other game really can fulfill. It has its own little charm and everything. There's a few things that I wish were a little bit more different. I wish that some of the stuff that's in the new Game Plus just was put into the main story so that it prolonged the main story longer, make it a little bit tougher maybe, or a little bit more lengthy so that you really can develop all of the character stories without having to kind of restart from the start in your new Game Plus just to finish the storyline for some of the characters in the game. So that's kind of how I feel about it, but overall it's a pretty solid 8.5 game. It's definitely worth picking up. Don't let the graphics turn you away or anything like that. It's worth picking up. It comes up on sale quite regularly. I picked this game up for like $6, I believe. So for $6, it's totally worth it. And now I'm going to go ahead and briefly go back on my playthrough. So if you haven't watched my playthrough, or if you've never played the game or anything like that, you might want to stop watching now. I know that typically people that make YouTube video don't want you to stop watching, but I'm going to maybe use a few spoilers. So if you want to play this game for yourself, or watch a playthrough in its entirety, you might want to stop here so that I don't spoil that for you. So In my playthrough, as you know, I played with some random elements. I've beat this game several times, so that's something that I do with my channel when I do Let's Plays, is I try to add some random elements to add to the challenge of the game. So for Recettear, I stuck to Louis only as my adventurer, and for the most part I really tried to stick to selling only what I would find in dungeons, with some fusion mixed in, because there's a day of the week where you cannot go into dungeons, so you know, that day I would usually buy things or try to fusion. I did skip a few days sometimes to meet my outstanding orders and whatnot, but all in all I really tried to stick to the plan, but sadly I failed, so I was not able to beat the game. If you've watched my playthrough, you know that I came up short on the 500,000 picks on the last week of the month where I needed to make my payment, the last payment. So I failed, and I got to see what happens when you fail for the first time, because quite honestly, the game is fairly easy if you play the game just for what it is. I mean, just the main story. The game can get pretty hard when you get into the later dungeons and everything. When you play your New Game Plus and you unlock those dungeons, the game can get pretty tough in there. But, you know, for the main story, the game is pretty easy. That being said, I was a little bit unlucky. It took Charm forever to show up, and I did not unlock the next dungeon until it was almost too late. So I was not able to build up on some of the money that I should have been making early on by getting better items in the dungeons. That did not happen until later, and by then it was too late. Also, I did not get super lucky with the market. Not a lot of items sold for double. It didn't happen a lot, but a lot of the gear was priced down for most of my playthrough. So I was a little bit unlucky with that as well. So do I believe that the game can be beaten in the way that I played, by kind of, you know, restraining yourself to only dungeon items for the most part and everything? Yes, absolutely. I believe that it's possible, but you do need to have things to go your way for it. I didn't, so I failed in my playthrough. If there's somebody that's watching this that wants to challenge themselves to see if they can do it, I welcome you to do a Let's Play. I will watch it gladly. And then we can see if you are successful at beating the game the way that I try to play. So yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at. So that's gonna be it for my whole Recettear thing. I will be moving on to a different game. I'm gonna start playing a playthrough of something else, probably adding some random elements in there, because I like to do that. I like to add some challenge wherever possible. And well, I am going to end this little opinion piece. It was not meant to be a full-blown review yet again, and well, as usual, thank you for tuning in, and if you've liked the video, feel free to like and subscribe. That's always appreciated. And well, I'm not gonna say until I roll this game again, because I am done with it. So thank you for tuning in.